If we say NATO is collapsing or will disappear in 10 years, many will criticize us for attracting eyeballs. However, it is not clickbait. Here's the thing. What are we watching right now? American and other NATO members are not happy with each other. It is not just another awkward moment between allies. It's not like, oh, bad week, bad weather, and everything is bad. Tensions are high, they need to smooth it over. It is way bigger than that. NATO is falling apart from the inside. Hi everyone, welcome back to Difference Frames the World, a channel to see the world from a unique perspective. Today, we witness the collapse of NATO, the slow, quiet breakdown of the whole Atlantic alliance system. It took several generations, over almost 8 decades after the Second World War, to build a tool to counter the former Soviet Union, which was later reshaped to contain Russia, and even China in recent years. The natural leader of NATO is the United States, and the US is now led by Donald Trump, who does not take NATO as seriously as previous US leaders. In Donald Trump's eyes, anything that does not align with America's interests should be kicked off his priority list. NATO should no longer take advantage of the United States. It should handle its own business, rather than waste American taxpayers' money for its own benefit. It isn't something that gets fixed at the next NATO summit with a group photo and a joint statement. Donald Trump is an easy guy, and he does not like NATO. NATO is like a pack of wolves, not a tiger, not a lion. Its issue is structural. It's coming apart at the seams. The underlying reason is that the US and Europe are not only allies but also rivals. The uncomfortable part nobody in Washington wants to say out loud: the US has basically ruined Europe's economic foundation. Still, US politicians are surprised when Europe doesn't say thank you, as they constantly hear compliments from Japan or South Korea. And that leads to the question no one wants to answer honestly. How exactly is Washington supposed to keep a military alliance together while it is actually destroying its allies' economies? The Ukraine war is the ultimate weapon Washington used to weaken Russia's military menace and Europe's economic threat. Look at those European dumbheads who follow America's political correctness to undermine their economies. They sat obediently in the Oval Office as if being lectured by their teacher in the kindergarten. The economy is the foundation of a society's upper architecture, including the military. The US cannot destroy Europe's economic foundation, and then demands the Europe unite militarily as a whole when their economies are shattered. It's that simple. And this is where it really hurts for American policymakers. China already won the strategic competition for Europe, and it didn't fire a single bullet. French President Macron received the highest respect from Chinese counterpart when visiting Beijing. In contrast, a police officer stopped him in New York when Donald Trump was supposed to pass through traffic. Think about it. While Washington was rolling out tariffs, threatening sanctions, and telling Europe, you need to decouple from China, Beijing was just quietly doing business. China became Europe's biggest trading partner. While the US was lecturing Europe about values, security risks, and loyalty tests, China was building ports, railways, supply chains, the boring stuff that actually keeps economies alive. The United States has become a third world country if we only look at its dilapidated roads and bridges. At the same time, China is helping developing countries become beautiful nations, better than most US cities. If someday Africa looks more attractive than America, do not be surprised. Beijing is quiet and silent, no speeches. No moral lectures. Just deals. And eventually, Europe had to face reality. As we said yesterday in the video titled $1 trillion surplus in less than 11 months. China changed global trade forever, their pockets are flatter than their months, and tend to be more honest. The United States basically forced Europe into a choice. Stick with the US strategically, or protect your own economic future. Europe chose its economy. Europe chose China. And honestly, that's not a weakness. That's survival. To understand why it was almost inevitable, we have to rewind a bit. After the Cold War ended, American leaders lived under a really dangerous assumption for over 30 years. They believed military power automatically gave them economic leverage. China's Chairman Mao said, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun," and many say truth exists within the range of a cannon. After the collapse of the former Soviet Union, American politicians all became believers in Chairman Mao, and they went even further, advocating that might is right. In other words, they are telling Europe, "We protect you, so you'll do whatever we say." During the Cold War, that made sense. The Soviet Union was a real, existential threat. NATO wasn't optional, it was essential. But after 1991, and especially after the early 2000s, the world changed. The biggest threats weren't Russian tanks rolling across borders anymore. In fact, Russia has become so weak economically that it seeks to please Europe rather than harass it. Most of the threats nowadays are economic: trade frictions, supply chains, technology blockade, and energy shortage. And instead of adapting to such changes, Washington kept thinking in Cold War terms. U.S. leaders assumed they could still tell Europe with whom it could do business, even as they offered less and less actual security value. They assumed Europe would walk away from hundreds of billions of dollars in trade with China because America asked it to do so, either nicely or, if that didn't work, loudly threaten it with whatever was available in U.S. hands. What does the U.S. have in its hands now? No one wants to think about it. When a government can shut down for many weeks due to a lack of money, what can you expect it has in its hands? America's assumption turned out to be completely wrong. European countries do not need America as much as they did before, but they do not have a real alternative to China. Germany's factories depend on Chinese markets and parts. French luxury brands need Chinese consumers. Italian manufacturers, Spanish designers, almost everything is tied into Chinese supply chains or consumer markets. China is the biggest consumer market, bigger than the US. Moreover, Americans are not keen on European luxury brands as Chinese consumers are. No backup market is even close in size to the Chinese market. You can't just flip a switch and replace a 1.4 billion person market. That's fantasy. The US can't offer that. Nobody can. Someone may say India. We smile and have no comment. We just said the Ukraine war ruined Europe's economic foundation, and the US did it purposely. Energy prices blew up after the Nord Stream incidents. Inflation hit hard. Industrial competitiveness dropped. Regular people were feeling it in their bills and paychecks. Most people in all countries feel the same, but Europeans are suffering the most. So when Washington showed up and said, "Hey, we need you to make even more sacrifices to contain China," European leaders had to do the math. Do we please Washington emotionally across the Atlantic Ocean, or do we survive politically at home? They chose survival. They are stupid but not as stubborn as 2 years ago. As Russia is stuck in Ukraine, so in the public's mind across Europe, the immediate existential threat feels lower than it did before. When there is no existential risk, survival becomes more meaningful than choosing sides politically. Meanwhile, China isn't threatening to invade Europe. President Xi Jinping looks nice, and he is not Genghis Khan. He is offering investment, technology partnerships, and market access. So the old bargain with the United States, give up Europe's economic freedom for America's military protection, doesn't feel worth it anymore. And this ties into a really basic rule of power politics. If you can't make things, you can't trade them. If you can't trade things, you can't get money. If you can't get enough money, you can't defend yourself. Economic strength comes first. It is the foundation of everything. America forgot that. China didn't. China always tells the world, "Let's make money together." Now look at what actually happened over the past months since Donald Trump re-entered the White House. The US slapped tariffs on China and told Europe to do the same. It threatened secondary sanctions on European companies working with Chinese tech firms. The message was blunt: you're either with us or against us. But here's the part that drove Europeans crazy. The US says one thing and does another. Ironically, American companies were expanding in China. Tesla built its biggest factory outside the US in Shanghai in 2019, and it took only 10 months to finish the construction. Without the megaplant in China, Tesla would have filed for bankruptcy several years ago. Apple was making around a fifth of its revenue from Chinese consumers. Wall Street firms were quietly increasing their exposure. So Europe looked at this and thought, wait, you want us to decouple with Beijing, but you're cashing more Chinese checks. And Europe adjusted. French President Macron became a frequent visitor to Beijing. France signed deals in climate tech, nuclear energy, and many other fields. Italy left the Belt and Road Initiative for political reasons in early 2024. Still, China is Italy's largest trading partner in Asia, and its second largest non-EU market after the United States. That wasn't betrayal. That was self-preservation. The US turned it into a binary choice. Europe picked economic viability. So who messed this up? On one side, the American leadership is still clinging to the idea that military power equals control, threatening allies and demanding loyalty. And the American leaders are still thinking that speeches about values can replace real economic incentives. On the other side, Beijing understood something Washington didn't: when security threats fade, economics takes over. Moreover, China is becoming a world power, with military might, boasting the largest navy on Earth. Of course, China does not need to bully Europe. It just needs to offer something better. And European leaders, dealing with inflation, energy crises, and angry voters, decided that partnering with China was less risky than blowing up their economies. In any case, President Xi Jinping is viewed more as a brother to them than Donald Trump, who rarely smiles in their presence. Trump seems unhappy around them, constantly suspecting that they are taking something from the US. President Xi Jinping also extends his hand. Here's the key point: America handed China this leverage. China didn't steal Europe from the United States. Washington gave the leverage away by demanding Europe's decoupling from China without offering alternatives. It was not a Chinese victory, as China did not fight for it. It was, however, an American failure. The US did lose Europe to China. What if the US wants to reverse this now? Extremely unlikely. There aren't replacement markets for Europe. The US can't absorb what China buys. European companies are already deeply investing in China. Walking away means massive losses. And China? China has options. Europe doesn't. China can redirect trade. Europe can't magically replace Chinese demand. That imbalance changes everything. China's approach is simple: here's the market. Here's the investment. We are not teachers. We do not lecture anyone. America's approach has been, do what we say, or wait for our sanctions. That's not a strategy. That's denial. That is bully. That is harassment. Always bear in mind that there are basic rules in alliances. Don't threaten partners who have other options. Don't demand sacrifices you won't make yourself. Don't assume old loyalty lasts forever. Enemies can become friends for mutual interests, and friends can part ways if the value diminishes. Washington has literally broken all of those rules at once. In the short term, we will see NATO coordination quietly weaken. Political support for US positions fades in Europe. European leaders will no longer tolerate America's arrogance as much as they did before, and will ignore Washington's ignorance by day. In the long run, the damage is more serious and the crack is wider. The military alliance that has defended the West since 1949 won't collapse overnight, but it matters less than it used to. Europe will hedge, diversify, reduce its dependence. It will build ties that bypass Washington. That isn't a theory. It's already happening. And once hard-earned trust is gone, it doesn't come back quickly. During Donald Trump's first term, many Chinese regarded him as an undercover comrade who undermined the US from the inside for China, and now the comrade is working for China's benefit again. He has handed Europe to China, so when he left the position in 2029, NATO will be weaker, posing little threat to China. No wonder President Xi Jinping shook hands with him so happily. It is a comrade handshake. By the 2030s, NATO might still exist on paper, but functionally, it'll be a shell. And here's the brutal takeaway from today's episode. Great powers don't fall because someone beats them in a war. They fall because they bleed themselves economically and push their allies away. China didn't defeat the US, and it doesn't have to. It just waited, and it will continue to wait. The US will defeat itself. When Washington chose ultimatums instead of adaptation, the game was already lost. America didn't lose Europe. Instead, it abandoned Europe and isolated itself. Instead of making America great again, Donald Trump is making America shrink again. When the US retreats, becoming an American country, Europe is no longer much of its business. For Europeans, the US is fading away, while the face of China is becoming clearer and clearer day by day.